My name is Gene Walker. I have the privilege of serving as president of the school board, filling in for Dr. Tracy Reed, who is traveling today. And I want to welcome you to our Education Committee meeting. Today is March 12th, 2023. And today we have one item on the agenda. Tonight we will have a goal monitoring discussion around third grade English language arts proficiency. That's a lot of words. So I will turn now over to Dr. Walters and his team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Good evening. I am Dr. Wayne Walters, proud superintendent of the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and I'm here with members of our leadership team and Dr. Ann Fillmore, Executive Director, K-12 Literacy, and recently recognized as Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh's 2024 Advocate of the Year. So thank you for being here tonight for this Education Committee presentation. And this is our 5th monthly public conversation where we are sharing how we are tracking our progress toward our defined goals. Tonight, we are revisiting our third grade English language arts goal and providing a status update. We want to be clear about how we're doing and where we can do better to help all our students succeed. For those of you who are new to our public goal monitoring conversation space, one of the established goals was to focus on third grade English language arts proficiency. Third grade is an important milestone because it is the time when students move from learning to read to reading to learn. It is also the first year of statewide assessment in English language arts, and research shows that students who are strong readers by the end of third grade are more likely to succeed in later grades. Here in Pittsburgh Public Schools, we're also focused on closing gaps in reading skills, especially for African American students, students learning English, known as English language learners, economically disadvantaged students, and students with special learning needs, known as students with IEPs. And last school year, we invested in new instructional materials and developed a new curriculum guided by the science of reading, which is a body of research to help us understand how children learn to read. We continue to stay the course with our established goal, which is by the end of the 2024-2025 school year, we want 49.4% of our third grade students to be proficient in English language arts on state tests. And to help us see where we are and where we need to go to support attainment of this goal, we use 2 key assessments: the classroom diagnostic tool, known as the CDT, and Dibbles Acadians. And together, these assessments give us a complete picture of how our students are doing. The CDT gives us insights throughout the year so we can support students who are struggling early on, while Dibbles Acadians helps us track foundational reading skills to give us focused support where it is needed most so that we can support our students in their foundational reading skills. As was shared in November, 46.2% of our students who were third graders last year are proficient in English language arts. But we still have work to do, as last year our goal was 47.1% of students to be proficient, but we did not reach that goal. The year before, we did reach our goal, and these ups and downs are usually normal and tend to get better as teachers and students get used to our new curriculum, follow it closely, and keep learning through professional learning opportunities, making sure teachers learn not only about the curriculum, but about new ways to teach and engage students, which can help in reducing these drops in scores. The data also shows us which areas need more attention, and so while our white students have made gains, our African American students, students with IEPs, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students have shown declines. And this gap highlights our need to focus on strategies that help each group meet their needs. And so let's look more closely at the CDT results of this year's third graders. And the CDT test is given 3 times a year to measure key reading and comprehension skills. And at this time, we completed the first and second administration, and in the final makeup days of the third administration. And so allow me to bring some clarity to this chart of our current third graders. The red range, which is that column below the red column, the information below the red column, is the percentage of students not performing at or above grade level. So when you subtract that amount from 100, you get the difference, which is the percentage of students performing at grade level. The percentage of students who are likely proficient or advanced on the PSSA is calculated by the sum of the green above midpoint and the blue range. And the overall results show that only 21% of first-time test takers are at or above grade level, and about 10% are expected to reach proficiency on the third grade ELA PSSA at the time of first administration. The second administration does show some improvement to 30.3% who are now at or above grade level, and about 15.3% expected to reach proficiency on the third grade ELA PSSA if they took it after the second administration. And this is a 9.3% increase in the students performing at or above grade level from first to second administration. And remember that students took the second administration right around the November date of our initial goal monitoring conversation. When we look more closely and compare by subgroups, specifically regarding the student outcomes portion of the chart, if we look in the light blue rows in the last column, there was a 13.2% increase in white students performing at or above grade level from the first administration of 40.6% to 53.8% on the second. Next in line of growth are economically disadvantaged students below in peach, showing a 9.5% increase in performance at or above grade level from the first administration of 10.2% to 19.7%. Our African American students at the top rows in yellow showed a 7.2% increase in performance at or above grade level from the first administration of 8.7% to 15.9%. Our English language learners in the pink colored rows showed a 5% increase in the performance at or above grade level from the first administration of 5.9% to 10.9% on the second. And lastly, our students with IEPs in the middle, in green, showed a 3.1% increase in performance at or above grade level from the first administration of 6.6% to 9.7%. And so this shows us where we need to continue our focus on helping different groups of students. And as students are transitioning from learning to read to reading to learn, mastering foundational literacy skills is critical for students to comprehend and analyze complex texts. And so the Dibbles-Acadians assessment at the third grade level provides data in 4 subtests: words correct, accuracy, retell, and maze. And the oral reading fluency, words correct, and accuracy measures how fluently and accurately a student reads a grade level passage, assessing both the number of words read correctly per minute and overall reading accuracy. The oral reading fluency retell assesses students' ability to recall and summarize key details from the passage they just read. And the maze assessment is where students read the passage while selecting the correct missing words from the passage, measuring comprehension and the ability to construct meaning from the text. In the middle of the year, Dibbles-Acadians composite scores data indicates that 54% of our third grade students have not yet mastered the skills necessary to access complex texts, skills that we now know are required for literacy achievement. At the beginning of the year, data indicated that 45% of our students were performing below or well below the benchmark, and this means that the number of students at benchmark or above decreased by 9% from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year. And this decline emphasizes the need for intentional lesson design and differentiated instruction to address the diverse learning needs of our students, ensuring they can access, comprehend, and analyze complex text for overall success. A closer look reveals significant achievement gaps between subgroups. We see the percentage of Black students in the yellow row's last column performing at or above benchmark decrease from 46.6% to 37.2%. There was also an increase in the percentage of Black students performing well below benchmark from 40.5% to 46.2%. And we can see that a large percentage of our students with IEPs in the light green rows and our English language learners in the pink rows are performing well below benchmark. And while white students in the light blue rows are performing highest at 68.9%, they too experienced decline in the middle of year administration. And there was also a notable drop in our economically disadvantaged student performance in the peach-colored rows in the at or above range from 49.1% to 40.2%. And so these disparities highlight the urgent need for targeted interventions and equitable support to ensure all students can achieve academic success. And so to evaluate whether or not we're on track as a district to meet our proficiency goal, I offer some level of evaluation of the data. And so the question is, are we on track to meet this year's goal? And so using the available data closest aligned to the PSSA, which is the CDT, we look at the results over the past 3 years to offer some level of insight into probable outcomes. But remember, the CDT is not a predictive assessment. Although it aligns closely with PA core standards and eligible content, it creates a valuable tool for PSSA preparation by offering real-time feedback on student mastery of key concepts. And this alignment ensures that diagnostic feedback is directly relevant and actionable, allowing educators to tailor instruction to address specific gaps and enhance student readiness for the PSSA assessments. And so as we assess our progress toward meeting this year's goal of 49.4% proficiency on the PSSA, the results of the second administration of the CDT indicate stability rather than significant growth. Currently, 15.2% of students are classified as likely proficient or advanced based on the second administration of CDT, and that's a percentage that remains consistent with the previous 2 years, 15.3% in 22-23 and 15.4% in 23-24. Additionally, the percentage of students performing on grade level in the second CDT administration stands at 30.4%, closely mirroring past years' 30.7% in 23-24 and 29.8% in 22-23. And so this suggests while fluctuations occur, overall trends remain stable. And so the key takeaways from this data include the recognition that while we have not seen major shifts, we are tracking similarly to previous years leading into the PSSA, and based on historical patterns, achieving our goal will require a continued concentrated effort in the remaining months to accelerate student growth. And so with all of this data, analysis, and information, we're now ready to provide a status update on our initial strategies for lasting improvement through our continuous improvement cycles. And so this means that we offered research-based strategies for growth that involved planning, doing, checking, and then acting on what we learned so we can keep improving. By using this approach, we can make changes to help students in real time and adjust our teaching methods as we go. And these continuous improvement cycles help us with capacity building and intentionality focused on helping students succeed. And so to jog your memory regarding our third grade ELA goal, we employed 3 key strategies. These strategies were designed to work together, creating a comprehensive and cohesive approach to improving student outcomes, and each strategy operates as one gear while working in tandem. They ensure that the strategies employed operate as a well-oiled machine. And so the first strategy was to focus on lesson design through visualization, teacher observation, professional learning, and support. The second strategy focused on differentiated instruction, and we recognize that every student has unique learning needs, and our instructional approach must reflect that. And this strategy was supported through professional learning and support, a unified data analysis protocol, tech-based tools, and the teacher observations. And the third strategy focused on the identification and scaling of best practices. And so since our initial presentation to the board in November 2024, we have been implementing a structured, data-informed approach to improving literacy outcomes for our third grade students. And so this timeline just offers key initiatives we have put in place to drive progress. The gold rectangles represent inputs that align with our first strategy on lesson design. The green rectangles represent the input that align with our second strategy on differentiated instruction. The red rectangle represents the input aligned with our third strategy on leveraging best practices. And in November 2024, we administered the second round of the classroom diagnostic tool, and this was launched again on the same day of our first goal monitoring presentation, providing us with a clear mid-year performance baseline to track student progress. And to ensure that our educators were well equipped to implement our instructional strategies, we conducted professional learning for school leaders, literacy academic coaches, and teachers, and topics included coaching cycles, optimal lesson design using our visual model, creating quality feedback, basics of culturally responsive pedagogy and cultural competence, and data analysis workshops to strengthen reading instruction. Regular updates and discussions have taken place with instructional coaches, school administrators, and assistant superintendents to keep our strategies focused and responsive to student needs. And most recently, between February 24th and March 7th, 2025, we administered the third round of the CDT assessment with makeups currently taking place. And so while these results are not included in this report, they will be instrumental in measuring final student progress as we approach the end of the school year. And this timeline reflects the intentional, coordinated efforts we are making to support third grade literacy. Each of these initiatives is part of the larger strategy to ensure that every student has access to high-quality instruction and the support they need to succeed. So let's take a deeper look at our progress on the three strategies we intentionally employed to ensure we made progress towards achieving our third grade ELA goal. And for each strategy, I will review what we initially planned, share what was done, when we checked in on the strategy, what were the challenges, and our next steps or actions to bring the continuous improvement cycle full circle. So strategy one was focused on lesson design, as you may recall, and key components of this strategy included creating and distributing clear, accessible visual models to guide teachers through effective lesson design, providing professional learning and support through literacy academic coaches who work directly with teachers to refine lesson planning and instructional practices, and finally, conducting teacher observations to provide constructive feedback and reinforce best practices for lesson execution. And so the execution of this strategy included visual models that you can see there, that was the poster, professional learning and support, and teacher observations. So let's take a look at what we did. And so for the do section, we know that visuals were created and distributed in December to serve as a guide for lesson design and implementation. Professional learning was facilitated for literacy academic coaches, school leaders, and teachers. Literacy academic coaches also provided job-embedded professional learning for teachers around lesson design, and principals have conducted observations and have provided feedback to teachers focused on lesson design, and assistant superintendents reviewed all principal observations and provided written feedback to principals. So as we are implementing this strategy focused on lesson design, we checked our work and identified key challenges that needed to be addressed. So in our check section, while many schools successfully posted lesson progression posters as incidental learning tools, a small number of schools faced challenges with optimal placement, limiting their effectiveness. Additionally, we noticed that time for professional learning is limited, especially when teachers are doing coverages, absences are in place, and individuals are just sick, making it essential to use time strategically to maximize impact on lesson design, differentiation, and student support. And so to address these challenges, we're taking strategic action through refining our approach in the ACT section. And so coaching support will focus on real-time feedback, ensuring teachers can effectively integrate structured lesson design into daily instruction. Ongoing conferences with coaches will strengthen instructional support, and professional learning will be job-embedded, allowing for continuous improvement. School leaders will actively monitor implementation through structured 90-minute lesson observations, with assistant superintendents reviewing feedback to ensure alignment and support principal development with coaching. The second strategy we employed to ensure progress towards our ELA proficiency goal was data-informed differentiated instruction rooted in the work of Caroline Tomlinson and her framework that looks at it through the lens of content, process, product, and environment, while integrating culturally responsive pedagogy utilizing a continuous improvement approach. And so the key components of this strategy included engaging teachers and principals in comprehensive data analysis to inform instructional decisions, providing professional learning for teachers and school leaders to strengthen their understanding of differentiated instruction, leveraging our technology-based tools to support individualized literacy needs, and conducting teacher observations to ensure that differentiated instruction is effectively implemented in classrooms. And so the execution of this strategy, again, included a data analysis protocol, professional learning and support, our tech-based tools, and the teacher observations. So let's take a look at what we did do in order to implement this strategy. So we used CDT and DIBELS Acadience data to identify trends in student growth and areas needing support. We facilitated professional learning for literacy academic coaches, teachers, and principals on differentiated instruction. We introduced the 6-step lesson plan from the Reading League and shared practical examples and resources to enhance small group instruction. We provided access to supplemental technology-based tools such as Imagine Learning, MyPath, and Achieve 3000 to support individualized literacy development. And we performed teacher observations to ensure differentiated instruction was being implemented across all schools. And as we were implementing this strategy, focused on differentiated instruction, we checked our progress and identified key challenges that needed to be addressed. A major challenge was ensuring that principals effectively monitor differentiated instruction through structured classroom observations. And while an initial Leading and Learning Institute, which is our monthly principal meeting sessions, trained principals on providing meaningful feedback, many conducted informal observations rather than full-period evaluations, limiting their ability to assess differentiation and lesson progression. And so to address this, a follow-up Leading and Learning session reinforced the expectation that school leaders conduct full-period observations to ensure fidelity and provide actionable feedback. Additionally, work is ongoing to develop an efficient data analysis tool that allows teachers to focus on interpretation and instructional adjustments rather than just data collection. And to address these challenges and strengthen instructional leadership, the district is reinforcing the expectation that formal structured observations are a non-negotiable component of effective monitoring. And so principals will engage in continuous training to refine their ability to address differentiated instruction. They will also submit observation reports to ensure accountability and track progress. And those are the strategies and the things that we're doing to move this work into the next steps. And the third and final strategy we implemented focused on identifying and scaling best practices to improve ELA proficiency. And key components of this strategy included collecting and analyzing performance data from high-performing schools, conducting observations to study effective instructional strategies in real time of those schools, leveraging our professional learning communities to facilitate knowledge sharing, engaging principals in cross-school collaboration to replicate successful strategies, and developing targeted professional learning sessions on high-impact teaching methods. And the execution of this strategy, in summary, included data collection and analysis, observations, professional learning, communities, professional learning, and principal network engagement. And so let's take a look at what we did do. And to implement this strategy, we identified schools demonstrating promising practices based on their performance data, and we recognized schools where students were achieving at higher levels with smaller subgroup gaps in achievement. However, as we were implementing this strategy, we faced significant challenges in pinpointing and scaling best practices across the district, leading us to check our approach. And so while we aim to identify high-impact literacy strategies, our findings were unclear due to inconsistencies in implementation across schools. Additionally, mid-year data from high-performing schools did not align with initial projections, making it difficult to determine which practices had the greatest impact. Professional learning sessions on best practices were not prioritized in some schools, as we focused on solidifying lesson design and differentiated instruction. And furthermore, while strong instructional practices were observed in certain classrooms, they largely reflected existing district guidance rather than new scalable strategies. And so to address these challenges, we're taking strategic action through refining our approach and our actions. And so coaching support will remain focused on strengthening lesson design and differentiated instruction before expanding to broader best practices. Professional learning will be strategically structured to ensure consistency in implementation, providing targeted support for teachers and school leaders, and we will leverage the insights from school visits to refine coaching and professional development, emphasizing not just the best practices, but also the conditions necessary for successful implementation across schools. And finally, we will develop a structured approach to monitor implementation fidelity and address barriers, ensuring that instructional improvements translate into measurable student outcomes. And so as I've shared in previous goal monitoring presentations, this is more than just sharing numbers and strategies, but it's a commitment to a new way of governing our schools, focusing on transparency, accountability, and equity. And so we're working hard to adjust our practices, being extremely vulnerable based on the data we have, and are doing everything we can to create a brighter future for each and every student. So thank you, and I look forward to our conversation as we continue on this journey to improve Pittsburgh Public Schools for all students.
Thank you, Dr. Walters. Sure. And thank you, team, for the work that you put in to get this together. I know that it's no small feat to pull this kind of information together. So I will tee up board members online who have questions or comments while Dr. Walters is getting settled. We'll start online and then we'll bring it in the room. Are there any comments or questions from board members? Dr. Reed.
I had to come off mute. I had a couple of questions. I was curious about the work of the literacy coaches. Like, what does that look like? How long do they spend with teachers? Do they look at teachers in cohorts? Is it all individual? Like, what does that sort of look like?
Great question, and one that I will not be answering this evening, but I will turn it over to Dr. Ann Fillmore to give some more perspective as she works directly with our literacy academic coaches to give you that answer.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Our literacy academic coaches are deployed to schools needing the most literacy support. So those decisions are data-driven, and the frequency in which a coach supports a school is based on student performance. Coaching cycles will vary based on what teachers will need, and they work across the grade level spectrum. So if they're in a K-5, they're working through K-5 classrooms, and if they're in a K-8, they're working across K-8 classrooms.
Dr. Reed, I would like to add some context or information to that, though. So it's clear that we don't have a one-to-one match in our literacy academic coaches with significant needs. And so if you were to ask me what is a resource that's needed, more literacy academic coaches who are well-trained and aligned with the work of science of reading. We probably need more training in the elementary level of becoming a reading specialist to truly understand how to teach students how to learn how to read. So those were the things that I would offer, but right now, the average literacy academic coach is paired between 3 schools.
Gotcha.
With varying levels of support. We try to dispatch more time to the students, the schools that have the highest needs, but it's certainly not fulfilling an equity objective and certainly not one to build a capacity that I would like to have.
Gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, I was just curious if they're like woven into the fabric of the school day, if they are like, if it's a special sort of visit, like, so that's sort of what I'd like to know more. And then I wonder if there are, if it are just the literacy coaches, they're the only ones who are working with teachers with regard to literacy, I mean, other than their principals.
Yeah, the only other ones who would be working with them directly would be their instructional teacher leaders, known as ITLs. Mm-hmm. They also have received training about best practices and observations and providing feedback. So in that cycle of specific literacy folks, and some schools do have reading interventionists and support, but that's not across the board. So in your average school, it would be literacy academic coaches, the instructional teacher leaders, and principals. And if the school is fortunate to have an assistant principal as well, based on population.
Gotcha. And then I was also curious about the targeted, the formal structured teacher observations. I thought that that was just something that happened. Like, is it not, or are you saying that the teacher observations need to be more focused on literacy than they have been?
No, so
Or-
in our system, there are three types of observations that teachers can encounter. There are informal observations that are just snapshots. So you may be in there for 10 to 15 to 20 minutes, just taking a snapshot view, and those are informal observations. Then you can have unannounced formal observations, where you just come in and you spend the entire period. And remember, our literacy sometimes is blocked for 2 or 3 periods, so there's an extensive amount of time. So if you're doing an unannounced formal, you have to stay for the full duration of the period. And then there's announced formal observations, and that's the most formal observation, because that includes a process where they actually have a pre-observation conference where they look at the planning that went into the lesson. They discuss that. They discuss key questions around, how are they going to engage students? What is the plan for direction? What are the types of questions? How are they going to, center the classroom and do, so you can ask those questions in the pre-observation conference. And then that also then moves into the actual formal observation, where what we call on stage, we observe those practices that we see actually during the observation. And then there's a domain 4 around professional responsibilities, where they offer reflection and speak to those professional responsibilities. So that's the most intensive piece, but that is the expectation of teachers. And so of principals, when they do observations. And so when we observe the observations that were taking place, the majority of them were informal. So in order for us to impact lesson design, if you're just there for a snapshot, we could not assess whether they saw the transitions from the learning to read or the foundational skills moving into the comprehension work and the writing work. And so that's why we had to go back to the drawing board and say, no, these observations need to be formal and not informal.
Okay, that helps. That makes sense. And then my last question, I'm not going to take up the whole evening, but my last question was, is there anything that we know about the kids who whose peers may not be reading on grade level, but they are? So I live in a world of out of school time, right? And so I'm wondering, are there out of school time providers, partners that are doing a good job supporting kids outside of the school day, that we could maybe lean on or find ways to maybe replicate, encourage other organizations to do similar work. So my basic question is, are there out of school time partners who we know are doing a good job helping to support kids when they're not in school with regard to literacy?
So I know of some resources in different spaces like Duquesne University and a reading clinic and other places like that. I don't have an assessment on whether all of them are on our out-of-school time partners list and what specific dynamics are happening in community groups. So we know that we have some out-of-school time partners that offer after-school programs, but the intensity of their ability to transform reading outcomes, I can't give an assessment on that. But I can speak to programmatic spaces that I know that focus on those reading places, but some of them are very costly, and I'm not sure if they're part of our out-of-school time partner list.
Okay, thank you. It feels like that we have a lot of partners that are working on literacy, and so maybe there are ways that we can increase the extent to which our kids are getting that good literacy instruction in school and and out of school as well. So
Thank you for that.
That's all for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Other questions for board members? I don't see any online, so we'll bring it in-house. It's between you and Sylvia, Devin. So
You go. I don't have any great questions. Go ahead.
Ms. Delaferro, you have the.
Geez, I hope my questions are great, if that's the case. Thank you, Dr. Walters, for your presentation. One quick question that I wrote from Dr. Reed's questions. You mentioned the need for more literacy coaches, and I'm just wondering how many do we currently have in the district, and what would be the ideal number to be able to have the appropriate coverage to support our teachers?
So I'll let Dr. Fillmore give you the answer for what the current number is, because I don't remember offhand.
So we have 18 overall literacy academic coaches covering K through 12. We have 13 solely focused on K5 and K8.
And we also have one vacancy within that of someone who is covering in another position right now. And what will be ideal will be a one-to-one school literacy academic coach.
So every school would have one.
I would love to have that, to really emphasize the value and importance of it. And literacy academic coaches who come with a level of training on really understanding how to teach reading. Because right now, it was set up sort of like a, if you're interested, and then we'll provide some level of professional learning. But the in-depth scope of the work that we've learned through Science of Reading, we're not sure if even through our professional learning spaces that we have created the learning environment and the capacity and competence, where I would say that I'm comfortable with all of our literacy academic coaches being ultimate game changers in changing reading outcomes. So I think there's a space where they all have the potential, but I'm not sure if we've invested the core structures and strategies to build their capacity in ways that are truly transformative at high levels.
Thank you. I think that's something that's helpful to know, and as we're continuing to have these types of discussions, and in our role of, as a board, making sure that you have the financial resources to be able to run the school district, I think it's something that, I'd love to be a part of a conversation and how we, what we might need to do to get to the ideal goal, and maybe what steps we can start to take to move in that direction. But I'll, I guess that's.
Yeah, and also I'll
somewhere down
add
the road.
too, and I've said this before, but, our teachers are elementary certified, so that doesn't mean that they necessarily come as reading specialists. And then in some of our schools, because of the size, some are self-contained, where they're teaching everything, and some schools that are larger have an ability to be departmentalized, so that teacher can focus on literacy. Mm-hmm. And so, it's challenging when, even in our math space and ELA space, that if you're teaching everything, we're not sure if you have a strength in one area or the next. And so they're not secondary certified people in math. So if they're teaching math, they're elementary certified people. And a secondary certified English person is more of literature-based, but not necessarily like foundational reading. Okay. And so that whole idea of becoming a reading specialist is really, a skill set that's not too many people don't have it left. We have some in the district, but that's a key piece of moving the needle, because if you understand and you've had exclusive training on learning how to teach students how to read, you come with an added skill set to kind of really pinpoint and be able to, provide services to students in ways that the general elementary education teacher probably doesn't come with naturally.
Thank you for that. And I think about maybe what other school districts, urban school districts, that kind of have a model or a setup that we would see as maybe ideal for us, and kind of what they're doing to address those things. I can't imagine that there'd be, a ton of people who are specialists in just reading across the country, but, how are other districts approaching something like this?
So in one of the areas or the regions of the country that's getting a lot of attention now is Mississippi, who used to be ranked at the very bottom of the country in literacy, and really took a full statewide legislative approach to reading, with kind of pushing professional learning, intensive professional learning, pushing the literacy academic, a lot of the things that we're trying to do, just not to the same intensity because of our funding space. But they did that, and they worked intensively with their literacy academic coaches to build their capacity. A lot of professional learning around the science of reading and the research that's out there. And it created a shift for them. It created a positive movement for them in a state that was not always recognized for literacy outcomes. And so we've been looking into their research. We've studied them. I've met with superintendents in that region to discuss what they did, and we continue to try to emulate to the extent that we can.
Thank you. That's good to know, actually. Okay, so I just had a couple other questions. On page 6, assuming this is, page 6, we talked about the increase in performance across all categories, right? So I'm wondering what you would attribute to those increases, and then what resources would you need to keep or to consider seeing growth, continue to see the growth in the increase in. Anyways, sorry. I don't know if that made sense. I'm trying
Yeah,
to
so.
make it make sense.
Yeah, so the hope is that over time, with more teaching and more intensity, you will see some increase in preparation for the PSSA as outlined through CDT as an assessment tool. But some of the things is that we started some of the strategies, and it brought more attention and focus to the space. I do believe that when you have coaching specifically around a particular model and really sort of pushing and creating a realization around, hey, you know what, you can't just focus on the foundational skills. You have to build capacity with comprehension and writing as well, and kind of pushing that direction and making those small steps for us. I do think it adds some attraction. I think our teachers get up every day wanting to do their best work, and so with some guidance, I think that supports it. And we had some very targeted things. So that poster really kind of outlined not only the sequence in lesson design, but what things should be happening during those phases, and what are the resources that you can use, whether they're technology-based or within the instructional materials, to bring that to fruition. And so I thought that was very helpful. And having the coaches and the teachers and the principals all using the same language, with principals having the same poster to enter classrooms for observations, with the same information and understanding about it, I think that created some traction. We hope it creates more traction as we continue to develop and get more skilled with it, because that's the joy and the tragedy of continuous improvement cycles. So you learn a lot in this space, and you're happy about that, but you also don't want to abandon when you know that the fidelity to the execution or the implementation could have been stronger. And so that's where we are in place. Like, we've learned a lot from that process, and it's revealed a lot about where we are, and so we go back to the drawing board and make those adjustments to come back better and stronger the next time.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question I had, you mentioned the integrated lesson progression posters. That's what you're referring to, right?
Yes.
So you talked about how there are some schools that are successfully like utilizing these posters or implementing these posters, but then there are some schools that are maybe having a more of a challenge. What supports do you think that the schools that are having challenges could benefit those schools to be able to get to, where they need to be, I guess?
Yeah, great question. So there were two levels to this poster piece. One was just placement. So, placement of posters are so important. If it's a value and where you place it in a classroom tells you whether it's an incidental learning tool or you're doing it out of compliance. And so a part of the accountability structure was for all principals to take pictures and send back to me in a folder of where these posters lived. And so I was able to go and look through all of them and see spaces where you could see the visibility and the furniture arrangement where you can see that there's interaction. And then in some spaces you could see where there were two walls kind of bulging and it was in between. So then you know that the placement, you couldn't see it. Like, all students couldn't see it, and the teacher probably couldn't see it. And so those gave me the feedback for me to speak to assistant superintendents, get back to those principals around, hey, if this is going to be an incidental learning tool, it needs to be placed somewhere. Now, of course, for reflection and feedback, of course, we probably could have made the posters a lot larger and invested some money in that, but just placement tells you a lot about value. And so that was the first piece of critical feedback that we offered. Like, your placement is not just for you as a teacher, but for students to understand, hey, you know, we're in phase one of the lesson, we're in the second part of the lesson, we're in the third part, and eventually students would probably say, well, we didn't get to part 3 and we're leaving. And so it gives them the sense of like, this is what a lesson should look like every day for us. We should have the time to work on foundational skills, we should then have the reading and responding space, and we should then end with language arts and the writing. And if that's not happening, that gives a signal that we're not at least following lesson design and building capacity.
And then is there a world, I know that at least the principals have those network groups. Is there a world in which there could be some level of mentorship from principals in schools that are successful in implementing these things versus schools that maybe need a little bit more support?
Yeah, that's the work of our networks, our principal networks.
So
Yeah.
that already happens? Okay.
Yeah, that's the work of our networks.
All right, thank you. That's
Sure.
all the questions I think I have for now.
Thank you.
So I only have one question, and it's really focused on the fact that some of our schools, preferably the ones that are really underperforming, there are a lot of times in these buildings high teacher turnover. And then during the school year, some teachers that really grinded and we just wanted to stick with it may have got burnt out, may have took a couple days off, and then they found themselves in a leave of absence, so on and so forth. What is there, or is there a strategy for the short-term or long-term substitutes that now have to step in and be that teacher because they're not the teacher, right? They're the substitute. So, like, how do we track that kind of information? That way we can strengthen some of these underperforming schools, because consistency is everything. So if they're losing one of their main champions as teachers, how do we try to rectify that?
So first answer to one of your questions is we absolutely track it. And some spaces we know if it's a one day here, then we have a day-to-day sub that may look very different day to day. If it's a long-term leave, then we have one person, and then we can dedicate ITLs for stepping in to try to provide support. If anyone is here as long-term substitutes, they're invited to all the professional learning spaces. It's not that we exclude our long-term subs from becoming a part of that. So they get on the list for support for check-ins, even from our curriculum and instruction department. Our coaches target them as well to try to support, especially once they're going to be there for a long term. But it's really touch and go, because we do have some vacancy challenges, and a lot of them are in our elementary schools. And in some of our spaces, to give kudos to some of our principals, we have principals stepping in teaching because we can't find teachers. So we have some schools where principals are actually doing 2 or 3 periods a day of a subject area. And that story or that narrative probably is never told, and we have some teachers who are covering all day without a break. And it's unfortunate, and that probably does lead to the burnout or them, just needing a break. But that's our post-pandemic reality right now. Just being honest and open.
Thank you. Thank you all.
So if any teachers are out there that would love employment in the Pittsburgh, we're here. We are here. We're the largest employer in the region. We're here. Go to our website, pghschools.org.
Ms. Wilson?
I don't truly have questions. I just wanted to note, as people are watching, we're talking about focusing on third grade, but it isn't just the third grade teachers that we're talking about, because if the work isn't done in kindergarten, first and second grade, there's no real hope for the third grade teacher, because that means that third grade teacher is already behind. And I just wanted to make that as a point. And because I've been around a long time, I just like to say that I've seen the cycle of reading change as math and other subject areas. We were great once upon a time, and we will get great again. We do go through changes, it could be curriculum, whatever, how our lesson designs are. And I appreciate what is happening right now. The fact that we're focusing in all the things that we do, we're looking at our data and we're using that to strengthen what's going on in the classroom. That's what works. And we will continue to see that occur. It's certainly not a negative, it's a positive. And I agree, Dr. Walters, when you're that self-contained classroom teacher, it is kind of tough to be able to do all. I have to admit that I taught everything except math and library when I first started teaching. And I admit, science kind of got a little bit lost in my classroom. Had I had more hands-on material, it might not have been, but it was tough. But it is tough, and you're right. Every elementary school teacher is not the expert in every single subject. They may be better in reading, they may be better in the English or social studies, but we do have to do it all. And so as we look at all this material that we're talking about today, we have to understand that everybody's an individual, but if we all get on the same page and we are following the same guidelines, not every single day the same page like we once used to have to do, but following the same design, we will see things become better. And that's my input today.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Udine.
Thank you.
We can hear you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Dr. Walters, for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. Who teaches reading at the third grade level? Who are the teachers of reading at that level?
You mean as a third grade teacher?
Yes.
Any third grade teacher that's assigned to third grade.
So we don't have reading teachers at third grade.
If they're departmentalized, they might get the title of a reading teacher, but they're elementary certified educator that's teaching reading. We don't have a reading specialist teaching reading in that current space. They may come and provide support, or if that teacher happens to have a reading specialist certification, but generally speaking, they're elementary certified teachers.
And what has our experience taught us about the effectiveness of teachers who are not necessarily reading certified, but are just generalists as teachers?
Well, I mean, certainly if you come in with a reading specialist certification, you probably know a lot more about the process of learning how to read. And there was a time historically when that was the thing to do to become more attractive to be employed. Over time, it turned into having a special education certification to be more marketable. And in these days, it might probably be English as a second language certification to become more marketable. But it's not a requirement of becoming an elementary educator. It's just an added certification. Where I think there's hope is I think school districts can provide, if we had time and space, the professional learning to build that capacity, because it's the same thing that an elementary certified teacher would do if they went to become a reading specialist. They had intensive support and learning time and spaces for them to build that capacity. In our current space, we don't have that within our current construct, and so we try to do the best we can and support it through our coaches, who we can pull more often to build their capacity, to serve as coaches to teachers to build their capacity.
What do you need from the board in order to strategically strengthen our capacity to teach the science of reading? What do need to do?
I need a lot of money, I need a lot of time, and I need a focus on understanding that we need to do some things differently. Very similar as what we're trying to do with our facilities utilization plan, to think differently and in a more innovative manner around educating our students right now. Because our current model, if it remains the same, will not sustain us for the long haul. So that is what I would need.
When we put together our annual budget, to what extent is the science of reading elevated to a high priority, since we say that it is a high priority for us in terms of our educational strategy? How is that reflected in the budget?
So it's reflected in the budget. First of all, the science of reading is the body of research. So it's not a thing, it's the body of research around how students learn how to read. And
Right.
so how we support that is we make sure that it's infused into our instructional materials. So when we purchase instructional materials, we look for those materials that have that infusion of that research in there and offer the pedagogical support to do so. The challenge that we have is that we need time, because it's one of the major shifts that's moved from, when there was this era of another methodology and now moving into this space. We need time and we need space to allow them to learn, to try, and to embrace a different way of teaching students how to read. And right now, our current construct, especially at the elementary level, that's probably the most restrictive scheduling dynamic that we have, even per our union contract, compared to our high schools. And so we need to do some things differently to really give elementary teachers who have a very large plate, if they're self-contained, to be able to have that time and space to be departmentalized, to give them time and space to learn from with other, to have job-embedded professional learning experiences, and not spend their full day just covering classes.
Yeah. I can't think of anything more important for us to be doing than to be focusing on enhancing the science of reading among our teachers. It's not clear to me that the strategy of just using our current teaching staff as the primary teachers of the science of reading I'm not convinced that that's the best way to get it done. It provides the coverage that we need, but I'm not sure that it provides the effectiveness that we need to raise these scores up high enough to reach our goals. We have high goals, but I'm not sure that we're going to reach those goals if we keep just doing it the way we've been doing it, and not providing the high priority in the budget. It seems to me that we need to, and this may be an important item for you, President Walker. We need to have the importance of reading by the third grade reflected in the budget. We've got to give the superintendent more specified resources to be able to supplement the science of reading and the teachers who are able to enhance that reading ability. So I think this strategically we have to come at this differently than I think the way we have been doing it. We say that this is a high priority, but I'm not sure that we reflect that priority in our budget work. I'm also concerned that I talk a lot about evaluation, outside evaluation. And this is also an area that I think we ought to find the resources to fund, to provide outside evaluation of the work that the teacher leaders are doing and the effectiveness of our teachers in providing the kind of reading skill that is necessary to get our third graders or get our children ready for reading to learn by the third grade. Evaluation is important, and outside evaluation is important. And I hope that when we come back to the table with budget work, that we will find those priorities in the budget and not just in our rhetoric. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dean.
Dr. Reed, round two.
Yeah, I just had a quick question that Mr. Dean's questions sort of spurred. Are there any regional efforts around like building the capacity of our region to do a better job with regard to the science of reading? I feel like there are literacy efforts, but I don't know if there are any like sort of targeted efforts regionally in any of the networks you're involved in that focus on how to move a district or move a school or even move a classroom with regard to science of reading.
None that I'm aware of with the specificity around science of reading. I know there are university partners and things who are doing small pockets, but nothing, when you say regionally, not that I'm aware of. But I can go back and check with my networks again, because that's a great question. But nothing that has come to fruition in my interactions with networks.
Yeah, I feel like we're doing hard work and we're trying to do it alone, and maybe there are some other partners that could help us out. So,
Sure, thank you. I'll check into it.
Excellent. Dr. Waters, if you could, so we've gotten a little bit of criticism lately around this process of kind of focusing on student outcomes. And some of that criticism says that by setting our goals this way, we're only focusing on test scores, right? Can you connect the dots for us between the work that we're doing, how we use kind of these diagnostic analysis tools, test scores, and other things to get us to a goal where our kids are actually reading at a functional level, not just testing well?
I guess if I put it in a more simplistic fashion, then how do you know? How do you know what you know? I mean, you have to assess. State assessment is the hand that we've been dealt, and if it's of no value, then why is it there? Why is it that those are the indicators that people want to select schools by, if it didn't matter? Why is it that our students are being judged based on those scores if it didn't matter? Why are communities being judged if test scores don't matter? And the fact is, you have to be literate. And in order to be literate, you are evaluated against a standard of literacy. It's sort of like, you're judged by the way that you speak. You're judged by the way that you write. There are entrance exams rooted in writing. There are interviews that you go to where you have to speak and communicate effectively. there are a lot of, in all professions, where you have to show your ability to comprehend. So outside of test scores, you still need literacy in every subject area to advance what it is that you need. And so this process, although it's very challenging, it puts you in a lot of vulnerable spaces, it exposes you. It's critical because that's the work that we do. We're an educational institution, so we have to educate children. And the way that we know if children are well educated, we have to assess. That's the only way you know if somebody knows something. You have to assess. Whether you disagree with the state assessment, the cultural biases, those kind of things, you get through the door in the professional world, you are being assessed one way or the other. You know, I'm sorry, that's the world I know. I went to British school first and went to American school first. The British system is all assessment. It creates your pathway. And right now, whether we want to admit it or not in this country, we use assessment to create pathways for children. We may not want to admit it because that may be, oh my, you know, this is just, I can't believe you just said that. But we do. That's why we have gifted programs and non-gifted. That's why we track students. We say we don't track them, but that's what we do. That's why we have specialized programming and things like that. So assessment is a part of the educational process. That's a part of how you know how students are doing. And it's not only academic spaces, we do it in emotional spaces. We assess people's well-being, their mental health. Your doctors assess you. You know, social media assesses you. So yeah, assessment is just a part of the world, but specifically with education, we can't do this work unless we know. That's our accountability construct. We have to assess. We have to know that you know. We have to know that you're competent. We have to know if you have the skills. And so although it's not the friendliest thing, it's not the happy place, but it is a part of us knowing how we're doing.
Thank you for that. I think, you know, yeah, we spend so much time trying to figure out how other methods to show, you know, whether kids are learning or not. I mean, at the end of the day, right, it is the measure.
Yeah, we can argue about the types of assessments. Let's
Right.
have that discussion. But at the end of the day, there has to be some form of an assessment.
And then, so we know that not everybody, we know that there are young people who read well, but test poorly. What are the strategies and resources and supports that we're putting around those kids that we know excel in the subject matter and just can't pull it together on assessment day?
So that's a process. That's process work. It's the same thing like stage fright. It's the same thing as you're afraid to get on a plane and fly. I mean, that's process work. You have to take people in cycles and try to build capacity slowly. But I think what's more important is that if the teacher provides opportunities for them to show what they know and can use that to assess, then you can value that assessment as well, so that that's not the only barometer and space and place that those students are judged for their competence and their aptitude. So, you know, the test is one, the state assessment is one thing, but there are ways to assess students of what they actually know and are able to do in multiple ways. And so in those places where we see that test anxiety may come one way, there are other performance spaces where you can show what students know and understand, and they can show and be confident and show their aptitude in those ways as well.
Thank you. I mean, that, you know, for me, it's really important. You know, my daughter's well out of school now, but when she was in elementary school, we had doctors trying to tell us that she had a learning disability and she couldn't do this and she couldn't do that. And what we found through the different assessments that we did, and I will give Dr. Lamar credit for being a part of this, you know, we realized she could read just fine. She just didn't read as fast as the test required for her to test well, right? And so we needed to create some accommodations to allow her the necessary time to get through the material, because once she got through it, right, she could read it, she could understand it, she could kind of spit out the information. And so I think it's imperative as we kind of continue to do this process to make sure that we use all of those things so that, one, we're doing that personalized identification of students, so that we know it's like, well, it's not that he or she can't read. It's not that they can't do it. It's that they just read a little different. Maybe they read a little slower. Maybe it takes a little bit longer to comprehend. And so, not missing out on those things, especially in how we're reporting back, right, to the community, so that even though we know that the state assessments is what kind of drives the system right now, we still are in the business of ensuring that regardless of how our kids score on tests, that they leave our system with the fundamental skills that are necessary. Because once they become professionals, my boss has never once asked me to read something really fast and then spit it out, right? They give it to me, they go, give me your analysis, and when I get it back on time, I get it back. So I'll stop there, because I think that was my last question.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I think the other piece of this process is not so much just about the assessment piece, but it's about the public seeing how dedicated we are as a district to improving the outcomes of students. The lengths that we're going to, the organization that we're doing, the structured approach that we're doing to improve experiences and outcomes for students. So it's not just about the test, it's about, look at the many things that this district has dedicated their staff, their employees, and really investing in children in ways that really show that we care. That we want to make sure that our students have experiences of joy in the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and that we're working hard and collectively to move the needle. So it's bigger than test scores. It's this student outcomes focused governance. This is our work, but I hope that behind these test scores, they see the efforts made to make the lives of our students better.
Well, I won't speak for the rest of the board. I see it, and I'm appreciative of the work. Before, I just wanted to say, Dr. Reed, is your hand up again, or was it just never taken?
It is up again,
All
just
right.
because I wanted to sort of, speak to that whole standardized testing. Standardized tests can't tell us everything, but they do tell us something. And I think if we use the tests in the way that this process is helping us use it, just like Dr. Walters just said, if we use the test to change adult behavior and we don't use the test to rule kids out of this or, rob them of opportunities, but we use the test to say there's something in this system that is not working right. And so we as adults in the system have to change our behavior such that the standardized tests, it's a real it's the basement, right? We don't want kids to just be able to pass a standardized test. We want them to excel way above that, but we have to get to that point. And if we use the test to change teaching and to change the way we think about schooling and to change the way that principals interact with teachers, if we use the tests in that way, then we will improve outcomes for kids. Because I don't think that any of us believe that our children should not be able to do the work that standardized tests test. But we know we want them to do that and more.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Dr.
that's all.
No, you're okay. Thank you. And it's funny. I think there was a 4-month stretch where I was saying, student outcomes don't change unless adult behaviors change. And I haven't said that in a while, and you just reminded me of that. And so I will leave us with this. I think as a board and as an administration, we should remember that. If we've gotten away from it, which is easy to do, let's go back to that idea that our students will not change until we do. And we need to continue to lean into that change that needs to happen from an adult perspective, taking our emotions out of it as much as possible, because our kids are bigger than that. Our kids are more important than that. And the work that we're doing is more critical to the future of not just our city, but our country. And if we don't do it right, there's not going to be anybody else that can come fix it. So if there are no other questions, I will again thank you, Dr. Walters, and leadership team for your diligence in this work, for your commitment to this very lofty task that we have given you, and for taking on the really important job of caring for our children and ensuring that they get the highest quality education that we can give them. So if you are out and about, please drive home safe. We will see you again, I think, next week. We're back. So have a good night, everyone, and enjoy some sunshine. It's still out there at almost 7 o'clock at night.